Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the complex business world and boil it down to the core insights you really need.
Today, we're looking at mergers and acquisitions.
And if you are a deal maker in the M&A space, you know that the operating environment right now is, well, it's one of the most volatile and complex in recent memory.
The pressure is intense. You've got rising rates, geopolitical shifts, regulatory uncertainty.
It really means the old M&A playbook it's effectively obsolete.
It is, and that's why this deep dive is so crucial. We're working from a really powerful source today. It's a new report, Inside the Deal, Mastering M&A Negotiation.
This one's from SS&C Intralinks, produced with Reuters Events.
Right, and it captures exclusive insights from senior M&A professionals. I mean, these are the people closing deals every single day under incredible pressure.
So our mission is to take those field-tested strategies, the
Yeah.
clever structuring, the innovative financing, and really unpack them for you.
But I think it's more than just the technical side.
Oh, absolutely. Beyond the technical brilliance, we want to get at the central, enduring truth that the report highlights.
Mm.
M&A is still, fundamentally, a people business.
And things like emotional intelligence and, maybe most critically, trust. They're the real cornerstones of success, especially when complexity is just off the charts.
So let's frame this. What are the macro challenges we're talking about?
Well, the landscape is complicated. You're navigating persistent inflation, a ton of new regulatory hurdles, shifting geopolitics.
And the big one?
And the big one, rising interest rates. I mean, the financial mechanics alone are forcing a complete overhaul of how deals even get structured.
Okay, let's unpack that, starting with that immediate pressure point, the cost of capital.
Javier Enrile, who's the head of M&A at TIAA, he highlights that financing costs are just increasing dramatically, and this affects everyone.
Right, you might think, okay, I'm a well-capitalized buyer, I'm using my own cash reserves, I'm immune to this.
But you're not. As Enrile explains, every company has an internal calculation for its required rate of return. You could call it a hurdle rate.
For any new investment or acquisition.
Exactly. So when the external cost of debt goes up across the market, the required rate of return for your own internal capital also gets pushed up.
Which means the target you're looking at has to generate significantly more value just to justify the deal.
It's a huge headwind. And if that required rate of return is higher, then buyers, just by necessity, have to become more selective.
It demands a really powerful conviction about the value you think you can create.
Absolutely. And that conviction can't just be, a gut feeling. It demands a much more rigorous diligence process.
Focused on verifying both costs and revenue synergies.
Yes, and Ryle really emphasizes the need for intense integration planning before you even close the deal. You have to be certain the value you plan to create isn't speculative.
It has to be almost mathematically certain.
Which is what's forcing this evolution in deal structure. If a straightforward leveraged buyout is just too expensive because of interest rates,
deal makers are turning to these more capital-light alternatives, like joint ventures, JVs, and these contribution-type deals.
Right. But these structures solve the immediate capital problem, but they introduce massive, sometimes overwhelming complexity.
And Rail notes that in a contribution deal, that's where two companies join forces and split ownership based on the value each one brings, the complexity is, what did he call it?
Exponential.
Exponential. Why specifically? Is it just the paperwork?
It's the negotiation itself. In a standard acquisition, you're just agreeing on the value of one target company.
Simple enough.
But in a contribution deal, you have to agree on the value of both companies that are joining forces. It's a really delicate, often fraught discussion about internal value.
And yet, despite that difficulty, the perception of JVs is actually getting better.
It is. The Boston Consulting Group found that 92% of respondents agreed their companies are getting at least as much value as they give in these deals, so they can work.
When they're managed correctly.
Yes, but the pitfalls are very real. The same survey highlighted that 42% of people cited a fundamental lack of alignment on strategic goals.
And another 35% pointed to unaligned business plans.
And that's where the technical complexity bleeds right into the human element. If you don't establish trust early, those misalignments become deal-killing fissures.
We saw that tension play out in the proposed General Natixis merger.
That was a perfect example, structured as a contribution deal for a 50-50 JV. It was supposed to create Europe's largest asset manager.
A really elegant way to create, what, 1.9 trillion in assets under management without a huge cash outlay.
It was a technical marvel on paper, but it hit a wall pretty quickly. Shareholder doubts, regulatory scrutiny from the Italian government.
The complexity just exploded past the boardroom and right into the political arena.
And that complexity, that need to mitigate risk, it guides us directly to how dealmakers are finding new ways to finance and de-risk these deals.
Which brings us to the explosion of private credit.
Exactly. When traditional banks pulled back as interest rates rose, this huge capital gap appeared.
And private credit lenders just rushed in to fill it.
Matthew Weiner of A4, he observed that the use of private credit has, and this is a direct quote, exploded.
So what makes them so successful where the banks are constrained? Is it just that they're willing to lend?
It's their flexibility and their structure. Traditional banks are so tightly governed by regulations on things like loan-to-value ratios.
But private credit lenders can be more creative.
They can provide highly bespoke structuring options. Weiner points out things like mezzanine debt or a common equity kicker.
Okay, for listeners who aren't deep in leveraged finance, can you just quickly define those?
Sure. Mezzanine debt is basically a hybrid of debt and equity. It sits between senior debt and equity on the balance sheet. Higher return, but also higher risk.
And the equity kicker.
That's often an attachment to the loan. The lender gets their interest payments, but they also get warrants or options to buy a little piece of the company's stock down the road.
Ah, so the lender gets an upside if the deal actually performs well. It aligns their incentives with the buyer.
Precisely. And that availability of flexible capital is really helping to spur the M&A markets, as Weiner notes.
But the even more dramatic innovation seems to be on the risk mitigation side, with insurance.
Oh, absolutely. Representations and warranties insurance, or RWI, has become standard practice. It's used in something like 75% of private equity deals now.
And RWI covers the buyer against losses if it turns out the seller's representations weren't accurate. Things you discover after closing.
And historically, that was one of the most contentious parts of any negotiation.
The escrow fund. How big, how long, what it covers, who's on the hook for mistakes.
That's why RWI is such a game changer. Weiner explains that the option of insurance has essentially, quote, eliminated that negotiation.
So instead of fighting over the seller's liability, you just agree on a third-party risk management cost.
And the negotiation can shift away from who pays if something goes wrong and back to the core economics of the deal itself.
That sounds like a technical silver bullet, but what's the trade-off? Is it expensive?
It's not cheap. Premiums can be, 2 to 5% of the coverage amount. But the time saved is invaluable.
So on a $50 million deal, maybe a $2 million policy.
Right. Which sounds high. But if it speeds things up, reduces friction, and lets the seller walk away with almost all of their proceeds right away.
Because there's no big multi-year escrow.
It absolutely justifies the cost. It's really an investment in efficiency and, frankly, trust.
And beyond RWI, insurance is being used for these really specific contingent risks.
Yeah, things like tax liabilities or risks from changes in law. There's a great example of this, litigation insurance.
Oh.
Weiner shared a scenario where a target company was facing a patent troll claim.
A situation where an entity is just claiming patent infringement to get a settlement.
Exactly. The seller was convinced it was baseless, but the buyer was, naturally concerned about the potential loss.
That sounds like a major deal roadblock.
It would have been. But the solution was litigation insurance. A policy was put in place that fully indemnified the buyer against any loss if the claim turned out to be valid.
So the risk was quantified, transferred, and the roadblock just vanished.
It's an incredibly surgical use of insurance to manage a very specific high-stakes risk.
Now let's pivot a bit to the shifting power dynamics in the market. With high interest rates, depressed valuations, and all this pressure on private equity firms to return capital, the leverage seems to be shifting.
It's definitely shifting toward buyers.
That sentiment seems to be everywhere.
It is. Eamon Hassanali at Pantheon, he states it unequivocally. He says, even in the secondaries market, it is a buyer's market.
And for context, the secondaries market is where investors buy existing stakes in PE funds. Why does a buyer's market there put pressure on primary M&A?
Because PE firms have been holding on to assets for 7, 8, sometimes 10 years, way longer than the typical cycle.
Their investors need liquidity.
They need it badly. So if PE firms can't sell their assets in the primary market, they try to offload them in the secondary market. If that market is discounted, it puts intense pressure on them to lower prices and just move assets in the primary market too.
So the lack of exits is driving leverage back to the buyers.
It is. But sellers aren't entirely powerless. They do have tactics to strengthen their position.
One of the established ones is the dual-track approach.
That's right. They confidentially pursue an IPO process at the same time as the M&A process. The threat of going public sets a really high, hard price floor that the M&A buyer has to beat.
And another key tactic, which Javier Enriel points out, is moving away from those broad public auctions.
Right. Because today's market demands such bespoke, complex deal structures.
Like the JVs we talked about.
The classic broad auction just becomes unworkable. So sellers are turning more to bilateral conversation and very small, narrow processes.
A one-on-one process.
It's often the most feasible way for two sophisticated parties to negotiate what's needed in this environment. It demands trust, but it allows for that complexity.
And that complexity makes valuation negotiation incredibly difficult, especially with stock market fluctuations. How do they bridge those gaps?
Well, they try to step away from the daily market noise. First, they focus on the intrinsic value of the company, which is based on a cash flow analysis.
Cash flow is harder to argue with than a stock price.
Much harder. And the second technique is to smooth out those short-term fluctuations by using the volume-weighted average price, or VWAP, over a longer period.
6 or 12 months, maybe.
Exactly. And VWAP is crucial because it weights the price by the volume of shares traded, so it reflects where the real trading happened.
That seems like a pretty objective solution, but I can imagine it just opens up a new area for intense negotiation.
It does, and Ryle highlights this perfectly. He says, then the negotiation gets intense around what that period is.
Is it 6 months? Is it 12?
Exactly. You now have to agree on the definition of fair before you can even agree on the price.
The other key technique for bridging these gaps is the earnout.
Right, where a portion of the purchase price is tied to the future performance of the business, and they're getting more popular.
Included in 33% of M&A deals in 2023, up from 20% in 2021.
They're popular because they let the seller capture the upside they believe exists while the buyer mitigates their risk. But sellers are often deeply skeptical of them.
Was that?
The data shows only 59% of earnout deals ever result in a full or even a partial payment.
Wow, we even had one senior dealmaker quoted in the report bluntly stating the common view on them.
What was it?
Always paid, rarely earned.
That says it all, doesn't it? It's a payment structure that inherently distrusts the other party's ability or even willingness to make sure the targets are met after the deal closes.
Let's shift to another huge source of uncertainty: geopolitical risk, particularly the threat of tariffs or changes in trade law.
This is having a real chilling effect on deal flow in exposed markets. Allison Dent, an M&A advisor, she observes that buyers are, quote, purposely slowing down the due diligence, purposely slowing down the process.
The fear is real on both sides.
It is. And if a deal is already under a letter of intent, a sudden tariff could be seen as a material change, which lets the buyer just walk away.
So what's the buyer's mitigation strategy besides just slowing down?
It's contingent consideration. Instead of walking away, buyers are structuring the payment so they pay less for the target if tariffs, for example, impact revenues beyond a specific agreed-upon threshold.
So they quantify and mitigate the risk of the political unknown.
But Dent also notes that tariffs are being used as leverage in the broader negotiation. Some companies are, quote, definitely using it to negotiate not just the price, but all the clauses.
It's a powerful tool in a buyer's market.
And this complex, challenging environment where deals are harder and risks are higher is driving a greater reliance on technology, which brings us to our last critical section.
Established tech, like virtual data rooms, VDRs, they're still central, but now they offer much better analytics.
These tools can give you intelligence on how bidders are engaging with the material. It helps sellers understand who's serious and who's just kicking the tires.
But the real shift, still in its early stages, is AI.
It is. Daniel Friedman of BCG admits we're really only scratching the surface. But AI is already enhancing due diligence, target sourcing, contract analysis, and Ryle mentions TIAA is already using it to improve both efficiency and depth of analysis.
But we need to balance that enthusiasm a bit.
We do. Chris Moore at Cleary Gottlieb, he cautions that AI tools are not yet completely foolproof. The bespoke nature of complex M&A makes it hard to develop a one-size-fits-all AI solution right now.
The human element of structuring a complex deal remains bespoke.
Exactly. But the consensus is overwhelming. Everyone expects a, quote, Cambrian explosion in AI-based tech in the next 5 to 10 years.
Which brings us full circle, back to the central thesis of the report. Even as technology streamlines data and process, the negotiation itself,
hmm
it remains fundamentally human.
When you have exponential complexity, bespoke structures, high-stakes geopolitical risks, the negotiation becomes less about reading a spreadsheet and more about working with powerful personalities.
And Ryle notes that negotiation is very much more an art than a science.
It is. And that means emotional intelligence is non-negotiable. You need it to read the room, to understand the other side's true motives, to know when to push and when to concede.
Which leads directly back to trust.
Allison Dent summarizes it perfectly. She says, M&A is really a negotiation heavily rooted in trust. You need to build that trust.
So despite all the evolving tools, the private credit, the insurance, the AI, the deal still relies on people's ability to navigate that uncertainty together.
That's the perfect synthesis. The tools are evolving quickly, but the ultimate success of an M&A deal hinges on the ability of people to build that trust.
If every financial and technical risk can now be quantified, insured, or structured around, the scarcity really moves to the human side of the equation.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. If technology streamlines every aspect of data analysis and risk mitigation, and negotiation truly is an art.
Are M&A professionals in the future going to be paid primarily not for their financial modeling skills, but solely for their ability to read a room, build rapport, and win the trust of a skeptical counterparty?
The insights we share today come directly from the report, Inside the Deal, Mastering M&A Negotiation, produced by SS&C Intralinks in association with Reuters Events.
You should check the description for a link to download the full report and dive into these strategies yourself. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.